November 8th, 1939. Munich, Germany. The air inside the Berger Brauchler beer hall is thick with the smell of stale lager and the nervous sweat of a Nazi old guard. Johann Georg Elser, a quiet, unassuming carpenter with grease-stained hands, stands in the shadows of the gallery, watching the man he intends to kill. For 30 nights, Elser had hidden inside this hall after closing, painstakingly hollowing out a stone pillar behind the speaker's rostrum. His hands are blistered, his knees bruised from kneeling in the dark, but his resolve is absolute. Inside that pillar sits a time bomb of his own design, a masterpiece of clockwork precision meant to end the war before it truly begins. The stakes could not be higher. Europe is already bleeding. Poland has fallen, and the shadows of a global conning tower are stretching across the continent. Hitler stands at the podium, his voice a rhythmic thunder that shakes the timber rafters. Usually, his anniversary speeches last well over 2 hours, a marathon of rhetoric that keeps his audience and his potential assassins locked in place. But tonight, the atmosphere is different. A thick, stubborn fog is rolling over Munich, grounding the Führer's private plane. To return to Berlin for a crucial military meeting, Hitler must catch the night train. At 9:07 p.m., Hitler abruptly cuts his speech short. He steps down from the rostrum, flanked by his inner circle, and exits the building several minutes ahead of his usual schedule. The hall remains crowded as loyalists linger over their mugs. Precisely 13 minutes later, at 9:20 p.m., the pillar explodes. The blast is catastrophic. The ceiling collapses, tons of masonry crush the very spot where Hitler had been standing, and the air is filled with the screams of the dying. 8 people are killed instantly. Had Hitler stayed for his customary duration, the course of the 20th century would have shifted in a single heartbeat. Instead, he is already on a train, staring out into the dark Bavarian night, unaware that he has just slipped through the fingers of death by a mere few hundred seconds. The news of the Munich explosion reached Hitler's train while it was still in transit. Instead of fear, the Führer felt a surge of dark messianism. He became convinced that Providence was shielding him for a higher purpose. But while Hitler's ego swelled, the German resistance, a fragmented network of high-ranking military officers and diplomats, realized that if they were to stop the descent into madness, they would have to be more clinical and far more daring than a lone carpenter. March 13th, 1943. Smolensk, the Eastern Front. The tide of the war is beginning to sour. The frozen graveyard of Stalingrad has claimed an entire army, and the German High Command is fractured. Henning von Treschow, a brilliant and aristocratic colonel, views Hitler not as a leader, but as a mad dog that must be put down. The opportunity arrives when Hitler schedules a visit to Army Group Center's headquarters, a compound hidden deep within the Russian forests. The plan is deceptively simple. Treschow doesn't use a sniper or a frontal assault. He uses a gift. As Hitler prepares to board his Condor aircraft for a return flight to East Prussia, Treschow approaches a member of the Führer's staff, Colonel Heinz Brandt. He hands Brandt a parcel containing 2 bottles of Cointreau liqueur, supposedly a gift for a friend at headquarters. Inside the package, however, is not alcohol. It is a sophisticated plastic explosive, fitted with a British-made time pencil fuse. Treschow watches as the plane climbs into gray Russian sky. He calculates the minutes. By his estimate, the fuse should melt the wire and trigger the detonator just as the aircraft reaches the peak of its altitude over the front lines. A mid-air explosion would be impossible to investigate. It would look like an engine failure or a Soviet anti-aircraft hit. Treschow returns to his office and waits for the flash of news that the Führer is dead. Hours pass. Then, the shattering report arrives. Hitler's plane has landed safely in Rassenberg. In a panic, Treschow realizes the bomb is still on the plane, a ticking death warrant for the entire conspiracy. He flies to the headquarters the next day, manages to retrieve the gift from Brandt before it is opened, and retreats to a private room. With trembling hands, he pries open the package. He discovers that the fuse had indeed fired. The striker had hit the cap, but the extreme cold of the unheated luggage compartment had prevented the chemical reaction from igniting the charge. Once again, the cold indifference of physics had granted Hitler a reprieve. March 21st, 1943. Berlin, Germany. Just 8 days after failure in the Russian skies, the conspirators within the Wehrmacht refused to retreat. They realized that remote control luck was not on their side. If Hitler were to die, someone would have to be standing right next to him. The occasion was Heldengedenktag, Heroes Memorial Day. Hitler was set to tour a display of captured Soviet weaponry at the Zughaus, Berlin's oldest armory. Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, a high-ranking intelligence officer and close ally of Treschow, volunteered for what he knew would be a one-way trip. He was to be Hitler's personal guide through the exhibition. Under his heavy winter overcoat, Gersdorf concealed 2 magnetic mines. Because the tour was expected to last at least 30 minutes, he used 10-minute delayed fuses. He had no escape plan. He was a human bomb. The atmosphere inside the Zughaus was stifling. As Hitler entered, Gersdorf felt the weight of the explosives against his ribs. He reached into his pocket and, with a subtle click, broke the glass ampoules of the chemical fuses. The acid began eating through the wire. He had exactly 10 minutes to live, and 10 minutes to change history. But Hitler was in a foul, restless mood. Contrary to the scheduled half-hour tour, he began to sprint through the hall. He barely glanced at the tanks and guns Gersdorf tried to highlight, his face a mass of agitation. He ignored the technical details and bypassed the displays where the crowd was thinnest, the perfect spots for the blast. Gersdorf broke into a cold sweat, desperately trying to keep Hitler engaged, trailing just inches behind the Führer's cloak as the clock in his pocket ticked toward 0. After only 8 minutes, Hitler abruptly turned and bolted for the exit, leaving the armory before the acid had finished its work. Gersdorf was left standing in the sudden silence of the hall, a dead man walking. He scrambled to a nearby public latrine, locked the door, and with seconds to spare, managed to defuse the detonators. He emerged into the Berlin daylight, shaking and alive, while Hitler's motorcade sped away. The providence Hitler boasted seemed to be manifesting as a literal sense of timing, a sixth sense for danger that allowed him to walk out of rooms just as the fuse reached its end. July 20th, 1944. Rassenberg, East Prussia. By the summer of 1944, the Third Reich is a crumbling fortress. The Allies have breached the beaches of Normandy, and the Soviet steamroller is crushing the German center. Inside the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's ultra-secure, concrete-reinforced headquarters hidden in a damp forest, the atmosphere is claustrophobic and desperate. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a charismatic war hero who lost an eye and a hand in Tunisia, arrives at the compound carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Inside are 2 blocks of plastic explosive. Stauffenberg is the soul of Operation Valkyrie, a daring plot by high-ranking officers to assassinate Hitler and seize control of Berlin to negotiate peace. The heat that day is oppressive. Because of the humidity, the meeting is moved from the reinforced concrete bunker to a wooden briefing hut. It is a detail that will change the world. Inside the room, 24 officers are huddled around a massive oak map table. Stauffenberg, using a pair of specially designed pliers with his 3 remaining fingers, activates the timer. He places the briefcase under the table, mere feet from Hitler's legs, and then makes a quiet excuse to take a telephone call. He slips out of the hut and watches from a distance. At 12:42 p.m., a deafening roar shatters the silence of the forest. A plume of smoke and debris erupts from the windows of the wooden hut. Bodies are blown through the walls. Stauffenberg, certain that no one could survive such a blast in that confined space, rushes to his car and begins a frantic journey back to Berlin to trigger the coup. But inside the smoke-filled ruins, a miracle of physics has occurred. Just moments before the explosion, an officer named Colonel Brandt, the same man who had unknowingly carried the liqueur bomb a year earlier, had found the briefcase in his way. He reached down and moved it to the far side of a thick, solid oak table leg, inadvertently creating a shield between the bomb and the Führer. Furthermore, because the meeting was held in a wooden hut rather than a concrete bunker, the blast wave expanded outward to the windows and walls instead of being contained and magnified. As the dust settled, Hitler emerged from the wreckage. His clothes were shredded, his hair was singed, and his eardrums were blown out, but he was alive. The thick oak table and the open windows had saved him. The Valkyrie coup was doomed before it even reached its peak, and the vengeance that followed will be the bloodiest in the history of the German military. April 30th, 1945. Berlin, Germany. The providence that Hitler so often thanked had finally run out of miracles. The city above the Führer bunker is a hellscape of fire and rubble. Soviet artillery shells are raining down on the Reich Chancellery at a rate of thousands per hour. The 1,000-year Reich has been reduced to a few square miles of shattered streets in a damp, subterranean complex. The man who had survived over 40 assassination attempts, the brewery bomb, the frozen fuses, the suicide vest, and the heavy oak table, is now a shadow of himself. His left hand shakes uncontrollably. His skin is a sickly yellow. There are no more narrow escapes to be had, no more planes to catch, and no more fog to hide his movements. The walls of the bunker vibrate with every Soviet blast, a rhythmic reminder that the end is not minutes away, but seconds. Hitler gathers his remaining inner circle for a final, grim farewell. He acknowledges the truth he had denied for years. The war is lost. But even in these final moments, his obsession with control remains. He is terrified of being captured, of being put on display in a waxworks in Moscow. He decides that the only hand allowed to take his life is his own. In a small study, seated next to his new wife, Eva Braun, Hitler prepares his final act. He tests a cyanide capsule on a beloved dog, Blondie, ensuring the poison is lethal. Then, at approximately 3:30 p.m., the man who had evaded death through sheer luck and timing across 2 decades finally stops running. A single gunshot rings out, muffled by the thick concrete walls. When his subordinates enter the room, they find the scene that years of conspiracies had failed to achieve. The blood on the sofa marks the end of the most destructive era in human history. His body is carried up to the Chancellery garden, placed in a shell crater, and doused in gasoline. As the flames rise amidst the falling Soviet shells, the escapes finally cease. History is often written by the victors, but it is shaped by the narrowest of margins. Had any one of those dozens of fuses burned a few seconds faster, or had the air been a few degrees warmer in a cargo hold, tens of millions of lives might have been spared. In the end, Hitler did not escape death. He merely delayed it until there was nothing left of his world to save.